You are listening to When Therapists Watch TV, where we discuss today's buzzworthy TV shows and what they can teach us about ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. I'm your host, Dr. Terry Bly, licensed clinical psychologist at Ellie Mental Health. Today we're talking about relationships. I realize Ted Lasso isn't a show about relationships necessarily, the romantic kind, but at the same time, there are so many examples in this show of relationships at different stages, different kinds of relationships, different concepts that we talk about in therapy on how to maintain relationships, how to repair when there's conflict or hurt feelings. And so today we're going to talk about what we can learn about relationships, including post-marriage relationships, from the show Ted Lasso. And to talk about that with me, I brought in two relationship experts. I have Deb Link and Rose Joyner with me today. Hello, ladies.
Hello. Hi.
If you could just give a quick introduction, who are you? What's your degree, your background, a little bit about, how you got here.
Sure. I'm Deb. I'm an LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist here in Minnesota, and I work with all kinds of relationships, but mostly with families and individuals who are going through separation and divorce, and that could be from people who are kind of thinking about whether or not that's the right choice for them, all the way to people who are, have been divorced for a long time and are dealing with blended family issues, high conflict co-parenting, all of the myriad of things that happen along that journey.
All right.
Yeah.
And you're pretty new here to Ellie. You've been here for how long now?
Since August.
Okay.
Yeah, so just a few, like 6 months or so.
Okay.
Yep.
All righty.
Yeah.
And then Rose, hi.
Hi. My name is Rose Joyner. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist as well. I've been practicing for 10 years and licensed for 8. And a board-approved supervisor for Minnesota for about 4. Cool. And I'm the clinic director at the Woodbury Clinic, and I've been at Ellie for about 5 years. I love working with all sorts of relationships as well, from kids and families to adults, teenagers, couples, and all the above.
All right.
Cool.
Well, great. Well, I'm excited to dig into this with you guys.
Me too.
So I'm trying to think of where to start. I think I'm going to start with Roy and Keeley because they're kind of the featured relationship, kind of your traditional, they fell in love, they started dating. And what I like about Roy and Keeley is that we really see a lot of different things that we talk about in couples therapy, even like how they started, kind of who's interested in who. But what I wanted to talk about with this relationship was, that part of season 2 where it just stands out to me. So this is what I wanted to get your take on, is when Roy starts following her around and she starts asking for, trying to figure out what to do about it. And so she goes to her colleagues and just trying to figure that. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on how they each handled that. And then also, what did you think of the way Roy tried to repair that? Are there lessons that people can use from how Roy and Keeley navigated that stage of their relationship? Or how did you understand what was going on there with Roy following her around, and how do in the context of what you see with real life couples?
Something that came to mind was thinking about the love languages and how we express those and how we receive them. I'm thinking that maybe Roy's love language is quality time and physical touch.
Oh, okay.
But just because you have those love languages doesn't mean your partner can reciprocate or feels the same way in return. So I'm curious as to what is Keeley's love language, and how does she receive and express love?
That's an interesting, because we don't really get a lot of insight into that, do we?
We don't.
We don't. Yeah.
So maybe one thing too is attachment style. Like love languages and attachment style, I'm guessing, aren't totally unrelated.
No, I would say there's overlap. Yeah.
And so I've always thought of Keeley as a really one of the healthier people. But you just have me thinking, Rose, that maybe we don't really get a sense of her attachment style or her love language or how she does relationships.
I don't think Keeley has a sense of that yet.
Okay.
I think Keeley's figuring herself out a lot through these seasons. Yeah. And for their relationship, what part of what I was making sense of is that Roy is going through a major transition. You know, his whole life has been defined by football and what he had, that's how he spent his time. And I think that, you know, leading up to that, there's all of this kind of unrest about who am I and like, who am I in relationship to others, and how am I going to spend my time? And meanwhile, she is kind of becoming busier and more connected to the world outside of the relationship, right? And so I think that he responds to that shift by trying to kind of create that equilibrium, right? So we talk about equilibrium in family therapy, that when something has been one way, right, and then the ecosystem shifts, right, then we sometimes unconsciously try to do things to like get it back to how it felt before, right? So I sort of wonder if that's why partially he starts following her around, is that, you know, she's a little bit more preoccupied outside of the relationship than she ever has been, and so he's feeling that distance and he's trying to kind of bridge that gap. So I don't know. I wonder if that contributed to the dynamic that kind of caused him to.
Well, and something too that I'm thinking about is there, and I'd love to get your take on if you see this with couples, because I'm guessing you see this a lot, where his career is winding down, and she's just coming into hers. And I'm thinking of like, you know, couples maybe where, you know, the mom stayed at home with the kids for a while, and then the kids, you know, get older, they're more independent. So now mom is really starting to ramp up, and the dynamics shift.
Yes, it does.
Now mom is like, it is my turn, and maybe dad's kind of, you know, kind of at a level place in his career, or you know, he's not in that ramping up phase, and now she is. And so what advice or how do you work with people when you see this, when there are different stages, and you see maybe the husband struggling to adjust to his partner or boyfriend partner, struggling to see the woman really now kind of ramping up and coming into her own. So I kind of wonder if that's maybe threatening too, to see that in your partner, like it's not going to be just about you anymore. I mean, the first thing Roy says when Keeley tells him about this, that she got these venture capitalists, it was, you're not going to have time for me anymore.
Right.
And so I'd love your thoughts. Rose, do you work with couples on this? Do you see this in your practice?
You know, I have, and I think a lot of it is how have you shown up in your own life to get your own needs met? And has your focus only primarily been on your partner or someone else? And I think the word, a therapeutic term called differentiation, it really comes to mind. I feel like Keeley's journey, like you were saying, she's evolving and growing, and becoming fully differentiated means that she's being her true self, having her own thoughts and her own feelings despite what anyone thinks or feels around her. And that's essentially true differentiation. And that's what we want for people, is to be differentiated and ask their partners, how can I show up for you today? How can I help make your day a little bit better? It's like making sure your needs are met so that you can be there and engage your partner in a way that's complementary.
So how do you differentiate without separating from your partner? How do you differentiate and come into your own?
It's a challenge.
Without that taking away from, I mean, because relationships still take work. They still take your energy. Some of your energy has to go to the relationship. So what are your thoughts on how you do that? If you're someone who is starting to come into your own and really realize what you're capable of, and that energy starts to take you away from maybe what you were putting into the relationship before, how do you navigate that?
I think that a lot of clear communication and expectations. You know, I think that I couldn't agree more. It's funny because as we were thinking about what we were going to talk about today, the word differentiation for Keeley kept coming to my mind. Yes, that she's getting to the place where by the end of season 2, she's able to be clear, you know, this is my life. This is the best decision for me for the next, you know, few months.
Yeah.
Roy decides to go on the vacation, right? And she says no. And he essentially asks her the same question. You know, how are we going to stay connected? Are you going to move on to someone else if I'm not right here, right? And so that that question of how we can, I think that's the draw, right, of codependency, is that we're right here engaged all the time. And so I know that I know you're not going anywhere because we're just right here. But if I allow this like drift, which might be healthy, it creates the space for two whole people instead of this one blob of a, you know, right? Yeah. Then there's space, right? And so that space requires a lot of communication, a lot of setting clear expectations, and like you said, intentionality. It takes work, right? And if that space isn't filled with those, you know, clear intentions and bids for connection with one another, right? That's another therapy word we use, right? If we're not really trying, then there's this float that can happen, right? Yeah. And I think that's why that space feels so threatening to people.
Right. Which is why maybe some people default to the like enmeshed, like, I'll just devote I'll ask you every time I want to go out. Is that okay with you? It's like, do we do everything together? We only go vacations together. Or we don't do girls' weekends or whatever, because if we create that space and differentiate, is what I'm hearing you say. If we differentiate, then there's this space here, and this space can be scary.
It's terrifying for a lot of people. And it creates this big question mark of uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable.
And there's a healthy way to differentiate that's like uplifting and healthy and collaborative. And then there's also a darker side of it where it can become, people might get defensive, or they'll get aggressive or potentially harmful. And I don't, you know, at times you might see some glimpses of that in the show, but for the most part, a reason why I like their relationship so much is they bounce back and they recognize when they've made those faults, and they come back and repair. They always repair. And I think that's what's important. Like, there's no perfect relationship, no perfect person, but if you make that repair part like a priority, then, you know, you could essentially use that process in all difficulties.
We're talking about repair, so jumping just a little bit to different aspects of the relationship. So it started when she, you know, he's following around and she's kind of getting frustrated with him, and it finally, I mean, I think we can all agree she probably shouldn't have gone to all of her coworkers first to talk about
in
it
the locker room,
you know, because then he finds out, and then he's really mad, and justifiably so, right? It's normal. They'd be mad that he walks in on her talking about this with other people.
But healthy to have supports.
But maybe not when you share coworkers and like you know, having it go to all of the, you know, people. But when he, you know, apologizes to her, and that, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about with repair. And I think he does it so well in that he looks past, I mean, he kind of looks past that she didn't do it in a way that was particularly ideal, and could see what the complaint was about. He could understand what he was doing. And I wish that was something we saw more. The last one we did, 2 episodes ago, we talked about men and their ability to talk about their feelings and how hard it is for them because they don't get a lot of practice. And I'm just wondering if this is something that you try to teach men or women. I think it's hard to apologize. So maybe that's my question for you. What makes it so damn hard to take that step? And not just focus on, well, why were you talking to everybody about it? I mean, I can see that being how so many couples would handle this. They just get stuck on the like, I can't believe you were talking to everyone about me. But how do you get people to move to that place of like, I get it. I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to feel smothered, or I didn't want you to feel hurt. How do we get people there?
That is, I think, one of my most fascinating parts of the show is this relationship that develops with Ted and Coach and what do they call themselves? Not the wolf pack, but
the Diamond Dogs.
The Diamond Dogs. Yes, the Diamond Dogs. And I mean, Roy, it takes them to show him what's really going on. And I think that so many men are missing the Diamond Dogs in their life. I think that's a huge problem. And a lot of women are too, and yet women do more of that, you know, talking about our relationships. But the magic sauce, or the secret sauce, I think, of the Diamond Dogs is really like shame reduction. We talk about that a lot in therapy, that in that room, you can say, well, this is what you're doing. And it's just a fact. And it's a fact that you can then go deal with in the relationship that doesn't change your status within the Diamond Dogs, or how much they respect you, or whether or not they will be there for your next future need, or whether or not they will be able to receive from you next time they have a need, right? Like none of that is jeopardized in that room. Yeah. And I think that really empowers him to do what he needs to do in the relationship.
And touching on shame, I think the word why kind of drums up that shame feeling in people. And I try to encourage people to come from a curious, open standpoint where they use words like what, how, when, so that they don't kind of drum up that emotional shamefulness and encourage curiosity of, well, what was going on that caused X, Y, and Z versus why did you do X, Y, and Z? You know, it's more about the process of communicating and coming from an open standpoint.
All right. Yeah, because then once he did it, what I wish more people understood is once he apologized, like that's all she wanted was an acknowledgement of what was going on with her, and she just wanted him to hear her. And I feel like it seems so hard to apologize, but it's so powerful to have your partner say, "I hear you."
Yes.
And I care. Your feelings matter.
Yes.
And
one of the things that the show captures so beautifully is that, you know, when you're used to more of this codependent or enmeshed, like close relationship, the distance feels so scary because you're thinking it's gonna take us further apart. But there's many moments where allowing the distance actually brings the closeness. That is real life. And that, you know, I think about, you know, how she felt after the bubble bath or the, you know, the rose bath. And that was a bonding agent in their relationship. That was we got closer.
Even though they were physically separated.
Yes. And then even that kind of funny moment with Jamie, where she sleeps with him the night before she
goes out with
where he, you know, he comes in and he's allowing distance, like, okay, well, I just wanted to give you this compliment and walk out the door, and then she initiates the closeness.
That's right.
And so like I think Keeley shows us that beautifully, that when we allow space, we create the container that connection can happen in. And I just love that about her character.
Yeah. And there are so many things that are healthy about she holds boundaries really well.
Yes, she does.
Like she just says, this is, I'm not going to get talked into anything. I'm not going to get coerced, and I'm not going to be smothered. I need to be myself.
Yep.
I need to figure out who that is. And which is interesting because when you first meet Keeley, she seems like a groupie, right? You think that she just dates guys, and she says, I'm famous for being almost famous.
Yes.
And so you don't think that she's going to be this person who can set boundaries and isn't going to, you know, and she was dating Jamie, right? So you just don't expect this from her, which is what I love so much.
Yeah.
What do you think though? I mean, is there a point at which, so I'm thinking about when I was watching that episode where the final episode of season 2, and Roy gets her those tickets for 6 weeks.
Yeah. And
I have mixed feelings about how she responded. Because on the one hand, I mean, I think expecting that she can just drop everything and go away for 6 weeks, starting the next day, was like unrealistic. And I think a lot of us would have been like, nope, can't do that. But also I felt like she didn't spend much time acknowledging what he did or try to find any, like, I kept thinking, couldn't she just go there for like a week in the middle of it? Like, couldn't there be some way to meet him in the middle? I feel like Keeley, that's when I'm talking about differentiation. I wonder, can you differentiate to the point where you start to pull away because you want to just focus on yourself? And then what are the dangers of that? How do you know if that's what's happening? What did you guys think of her decision to just say, I can't go, have a great time, I'll be, you know, locked in a dark cave working the whole time? What did you think of that?
It was emotional because it was like the last 2 minutes of the season.
There's that.
Like, oh my God, I'm so sad.
It felt a little ominous ending the season that way.
But I was thinking, I think it brought me to this point of thinking of our attachment styles, and it sounds like she's more of an avoidant attachment style, and he was feeling a little anxious. Although at times I think he can circle into the avoidant attachment as well. I think he was getting anxious because of the leading events of like Jamie telling her he loved her again, and that had just happened recently. And there was something else too, like maybe that one guy was kissing.
Nate had kissed her,
yeah, Nate kissed her.
So you're starting to realize that like there are men just.
Oh, and then he was
all
cut out
over.
of the pictures in the feature that she
Oh,
was
that's
in.
right. And he
So
was
I
cut
think
out of the
he was getting
pictures.
anxious, like,
Yeah.
am I losing
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
to the world?
Right.
And I think that she was feeling more differentiated and a little more avoidant attachment. And but what comforted me was that she said, "We're not breaking up," when he asked her. And I think that's that key. That communication is so important in relationships, that we have to talk things out. You know, communication's very nonverbal. It's, you know, maybe 80% nonverbal. And it's really about what we say is only 3% of communicating. It's our tone and the way we act. It's not necessarily our words, but when she said that they weren't, you know, breaking up, I really believed her that she does truly love him, and they just have to work on that trust and communication.
Yeah.
To reduce his anxiety.
Because you could tell he's starting to feel threatened, and that's good points. He sees all these things happening, and then she's this rising star now, and he's wondering, is there going to be room for me in this? And if I go away, will there be men just waiting to like?
Well, there will be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
there
think
will
that's the
be.
point, is
There
that
are.
there will be. There are, yeah. And so I think that the question is, like, does he want a relationship that hasn't been tested,
Yeah.
or one that is tested and stands up?
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot about that avoidant attachment style can be, because we're not actually sure what the answer would be if the relationship is tested. We're too scared to find that answer out, right? And so you know, he's knowing there's going to be a test in that moment, and I'm really interested to see if and how they explore that in
I worry
season
about
3.
that, because there's that teacher, and they keep kind of teasing
They do
at something with Roy and the teacher, and then
Yes.
there's still Keeley and Jamie, and so I do wonder, and I
Yes.
really, from just a non-therapist human perspective, like I want them to stay together so bad,
Yes.
because they've done such a beautiful job of navigating
Yep.
some of these pitfalls that I don't want them to fall down.
Yes. I know. I'm pulling for them too.
So I'm going to switch over now to Ted and Michelle. So we don't get to see much of Michelle as his
Yeah.
ex-wife, but they make a decision that I wanted to explore with you guys. From what little we know about their marriage, you know, they saw a couples therapist. It did not go well. She said she wanted space. He says, "Okay, I'm going to move to England."
I mean,
That space. We've talked in other episodes about the consequences for the kid, but so we won't rehash that here. But he gives her lots and lots of space, and then she comes there, and there's that. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there's that scene where she's telling him that she wants to love him like she did in the beginning,
yeah.
and she can't. And so he says, "Well, let's just be done then." And I had about 9 billion opinions running through my head. So I imagine you guys did too, when he was like, "Well, then let's just be done. I don't want to put you through this. You know, I want you to be happy." And then they continue fairly amicably, and they continue to co-parent, and she still, you know, texts him. So here is a divorce that is portrayed differently than in a lot of TV shows, and even from a lot of what we think divorce looks like, where there's screaming and fighting, and I hate you, and I can't do this anymore, and you're making me miserable, and fuck you, and we're done.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is a very different way, but it does happen this way sometimes. We just don't hear about it very often, and so I really would love your guys' take on, like, what do you think when a marriage ends, where it's this quiet resignation, or it's this like, I'm just gonna let you go. I'm not going to keep fighting for this. I'm going to let you go.
Well, you don't ask easy questions, Terry.
You don't. Yeah. This one is really hard, because I have mixed feelings about it inside.
Yeah. I mean, did you have that tug and pull of, like, you felt differently about it?
I kind of wish they went a little more into Michelle's story, like who she is and what she's about. And what made me think about it from a therapeutic lens was thinking about couples that are together for all sorts of different reasons. You know, you name it. It could be together for stability or housing or friendship or companionship.
I was just going to say
insurance. I don't know.
That's exactly what was going through my brain.
Dual
Stay
income.
together for health insurance.
And like I was thinking, when there's divorce, there's generally one of one or two people in the relationship where maybe they resign emotionally, but then go through the motions physically. And I wondered, which was it Ted that left emotionally first? And then Michelle was brave enough to say something like, hey, I don't want to stand for this anymore. Or was it Michelle and then Ted just agreed after? It's like, that's that thing where communication's like 80% body language, where what was their emotional connections at home prior to this huge decision? Because I don't think this happened lightly. And I don't know when it started. Like, whose decision was it to get married and whose decision was it to have a kiddo? It's like all these different things. Like, are they truly on the same page? And clearly they weren't.
Sure.
You know? So what do you think? So part of me thinks when it comes to making a decision to divorce, when you still care about each other, on the one hand, there's part of me that thinks, no, there's discernment counseling. There are modalities you can save it. Like, you still care about each other. There's something there. And then there's part of me too, though, that thinks, is there something to be said for ending it before you get to that bitterness, before somebody does something that they can't take back because they're so unhappy in that relationship, because they feel trapped? Like, we know that people do desperate things and to kind of slowly sabotage a relationship if they don't know how to be happy in it. So is there something to be said for calling it, letting the other person go out of love, out of like, I want you to be happy. And so I'm letting you go because you're not happy in this. Like, so I have these two forces where I think, God, if this can be saved, divorce is so hard. And it's so hard on the kiddo.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's something very kind and loving about saying, well, if you're miserable with me, I love you too much to want to like hold on to you for my own reasons. So I'm gonna let you go because I love you.
Yeah, man, I think it's a both and in a lot of ways. I mean, one of my questions is along the same lines as what you were saying, is Ted all the way there? Because we see through season 2, or even starting in season 1, the struggle inside of him to show up emotionally in the therapeutic process, bringing all of him, like his vulnerability and his inner world, to a relationship in a way that someone else can see who he is and interact with who he is excruciating for Ted, right?
But you know that showed up in his marriage. Where he
absolutely.
Probably always spinning it positive and trying to like not deal with problems, but instead let's just, come up with some, little quip or sunshiny spin on it.
Right. And one of the things that I say a lot is like when someone's going through a transformational process like he is, what we don't know is how Michelle and that new Ted would be able to do a relationship. That's an unknown factor because it's never been tried, right? And so the question is, do you stay married through those transformations? To answer that question on the other end, can I and this new person, or the new person I'm becoming and the new person they're becoming, what's the compatibility of those two new people?
Or can I even see the transformation?
Right. And yes.
They're changing. Can I even see that? Or am I stuck?
Yes.
Can I only see the pre-transformation?
Right. Am I ever going to be able to see them as anyone other than who they were? Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, I think that there are definitely many situations where either there just is no transformation, right? Like people are not doing the work, or the other person is never going to be able to see the beautiful person that this, like the Ted in the situation is becoming. And those are stagnant relationships. I think what grabs you and I and all of us, right, about that relationship is that they don't stick with it long enough to figure out what could be on the other side of it. One of my close friends said to me that there was a book she read, I don't know who to quote for the author, but that we have like 3 marriages in our lifetimes. It's just that the question is, are they going to be to each other? And I think that's a beautiful picture.
Is that an Esther Perel thing?
It might be Esther Perel.
Okay.
I don't know, but like we get married, right? We are 2 people. And that relationship is going to morph and be different over time. And I do think sometimes we don't allow enough time and space for that natural process to happen. And I wonder about that with them. And I do really see the kindness of the release instead of the possessiveness that sometimes you see show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rose, what are your thoughts?
I think the word divorce has so many like chains and I don't know, heaviness, and it can hit people in such different ways, like you know, because we don't know everyone's background with that word of divorce. You know, where did they come from, a divorced family? Were their parents never married? You know, it's just, I think it just comes with this huge taboo, you know, and I think that I think we have to be careful when we fixate on those things, like should we, shouldn't we, or should we get married, or like sometimes like people just fixate on words and forget about the importance of the basics, which is just relational, being in a relationship with someone, whether, no matter what the label is. I think it's more important to have a healthy relationship, whether you're married or divorced. And it's like, if you're married and have an unhealthy relationship, do you really want to stay 6 miles from divorce? It's like, you know, but then if they had clear communication, they're healthy, then you could have a healthy divorce. But if you're at that point, you might never get divorced. You know, I don't know if that makes sense at all, but that's how I understand it. And I don't know what led them to that decision, and I don't know their backgrounds with that word, but I do know it definitely comes with a lot of heaviness.
It does. It's connected to a lot of things.
It is.
I would say, to your point about before the escalation, I do think the kind of divorce that Ted and Michelle had is better for a child than for a child to live through the escalating conflict and the bitterness and the contempt. Right.
100%.
And the sleeping in separate rooms for years, and just, you know, the cold silence that is actually very loud silence in a house where both parents hate,
it's like
resent
deafening.
each other, because there's a resentment that's so tangible in a space.
Oh yeah, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's less about the word and more about the people,
the relationship that they have.
kind.
And I think that's a really good point. And I try to, you know, bring that home with divorcing, you know, couples that I work with, is that it's let's talk about how you can have the best relationship you can have, and whatever that looks like.
How to have relationships.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
And do you give people the cold shoulder, and do you call you know, say mean things about them? No, you're nice, you're kind.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're connected, right? Relationships are supposed to be connected. And I think modeling these disconnected relationships is problematic for kids, you know. At the same time, I think we have to define what's disconnected, because if the definition of a connected relationship is I feel the same way I felt at the beginning, which seems to be Michelle's definition.
Well, that was one of my issues. Like, well,
no.
that's just called marriage.
Right.
Who feels about their spouse, you know, 10 years in the same as they did when they first started dating? No one. And that's for a reason. Like, nothing would get done in this world if we all just stayed in that, like, initial stage of, you know, insanity is what it is. It's like blissful, amazing insanity, but it's not sustainable.
Right.
And so that's when she said that, I was like, no, but you can't stay. You can't feel that way forever. And
that's why I love Pia Melody's concept of love addiction, that some people can move through the stages of a relationship and acknowledge and participate in the beauty that kind of each stage brings. And some people are chasing that first high.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's amazing high. I mean, I don't know if there's any other feeling like it.
Sure.
Than when you first fall in love with somebody.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's like that differentiation piece, coming back to it. If like, is she dealing with her own mental health issues, and like, has she attended to herself in ways that she could, you know, work on her health and mental health? Or for both of them, I don't know if either of them have addressed everything they could address to be their best selves coming to the relationship.
Yeah.
You know?
So just thought of something. You were saying about, has she done her work? So she has a therapist. She had a therapist.
Oh gosh.
And so I just want to bring this and check in with you guys on this. So Ted had a horrible experience because they tried couples therapy, but it was with her therapist.
Yep.
So just for our audience out here, I would like, I'm under the impression that that's not usually a good idea.
Sure.
And
to have someone's individual therapist who you've been working with, talking about the marriage, talking about your unhappiness with it, and then bringing your partner in now to meet with that same therapist.
With an expert.
Yes. And so I was wondering if you guys could just maybe speak to, if you think it can be a good idea, or if you are, like I said, I was under the impression it's not a great idea, and if not, why? Why was this maybe a setup?
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's generally a good idea. And I think in therapy, sometimes, especially when we're talking about family systems, we have to get creative.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, if you have a woman who has been through some really difficult sexual trauma, and she has, worked that through with the therapist, and this is a place she feels comfortable, and part of what they need to talk about in the marriage is connected to that, and there's been a safe place created. I could see a reason for kind of bringing him into that space, maybe to talk about this tender piece of it, or I don't know. I think that sometimes we don't always know the circumstances. In general, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I think individual therapists are individual therapists, and couples therapists are couples therapists. And I do sometimes like the model of each person having an individual therapist and then those two working together to do the couples work.
Sure, yeah.
Instead of hiring a third cook in the kitchen. Right? So I think there's creative ways to do it, especially for those of us that are trained systemically, LMFT, that whole systemic mindset. So I would say never when it comes to the creativity of therapy. And that boundary is so important, so that the Ted in the situation gets invited into a neutral space where he's seen and heard.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Your thoughts, Rose?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said. I really like how you phrased that. But my rule of thumb is to refer out for couples work with people, because I want to reduce that dual relationship with the client and not have the other party feel like we're ganging up on them, because there is essentially triangulation going on in couples therapy, and the triangulation you want to reduce is anyone feeling triggered or pointed on, and like they're targeted. Focused on targeted.
I feel like with couples therapy, it's hard enough to help each person feel like you're not taking sides. Like it's hard enough when you're just working with the couple to communicate, like, I'm not taking a side. I'm here to help the relationship. I'm not here to side, I'm not refereeing. But I think if you've worked with one of those people already for a long time, you're going to have a much harder case to make that you're being objective.
And
absolutely.
And I also think that word therapy and couples therapy has a negative connotation to it too sometimes.
For a lot of people.
And I think that asking people, what's your experience previously in therapy, and how has it been helpful or not helpful, can really give yourself a framework on how to approach them as a couple.
Yeah, and I think the difference, we talk a lot in the divorce world about the difference between being neutral and impartial.
Yeah.
Because there are times that you're not going to be neutral as a marriage therapist.
Sometimes you will say,
sometimes you will say, like, this is unhealthy, this can't go on, right? And you're doing that in an impartial way. You're not saying it's unhealthy because you're biased against that person. You're just naming what is, right? And so I think when that has to happen, but it's coming from the person who's been your spouse's, your partner's individual therapist, there's no way it can come off as impartial, even though that might be the intent behind it. So I think it's kind of a slippery slope, I guess.
Well, I think too, even if it was your individual therapist who's been validating you and supporting you, and suddenly they're calling you out on something, that could harm that relationship too, I would think.
It definitely can test it, which I think sometimes is exactly what needs to happen. Right. The working through. Yeah.
So we're going to transition now to the most toxic relationship, but one that I think, you brought up, Deb, because I agree with you that it probably deserves a little discussion. Is Rebecca and Rupert.
Yes.
And yes, we're introduced, they're divorced by the time we meet these characters. But Deb, you brought up a really good point with me before the show started of like, he's still engaged. And we see this so much when working with divorce.
Yes.
And I mean, it's a mantra. I can't count how many times I've said to people, the opposite of love is not hate. If you still hate that person, you are not over this relationship.
Absolutely.
Until you've reached that stage of indifference, or like maybe some mild, pleasant, like this person has good and bad qualities, and I married them for a reason. Like until you reach something in there, you're still engaged. So I would love to get your thoughts, both of you, on how do you view their relationship right now as we see it still in the show? Because it doesn't really evolve a whole lot. Rupert's behavior does not change much, but we see Rebecca change. So
yes, we do.
Would love your thoughts on that.
How long do you have? I have a lot of thoughts on this.
You can always edit things out.
All the thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the one I think a lot about when I watch the show because of my work, right? Doing divorce. And I think about my friend Joe, who says, that most of the couples that we see in this high conflict, high stakes divorce, he says they're not done being in love yet. And I think that's a really good way of putting it, right? And and so I think that's partly what's going on with that relationship with Rupert. But there's this other element to him. I would put it differently for him. I would say he's not done being in control yet. Because I think that's what love is to Rupert, right?
Yeah.
And so what's fascinating, he is such a beautiful, that's not the right word, let's say an accurate portrayal of coercive control.
Okay.
Because
say more about coercive control.
Yeah. So his motivation and intention of the actions that he takes are to negatively impact Rebecca, right? So he is trying to control whether she's successful in her job, how well the football team does. He's trying to control her reputation and her popularity amongst the owners of the team. He's trying to control her emotions. He's trying to control her sense of self, her sense of security, her finances, right? Like there's not a part of her life that he's not attempting to control. And so his motivation and intention for his actions and his agenda with his actions is about her. And at the beginning, as you said, hers is about him, which is why she hires Ted to ruin his, football team. So she is disengaging as we go on. And there's some beautiful moments. The moment where Sassy says to her, he kept you locked in that ivory tower prison, but you climbed every step. She has people who are starting to help her untie the parts that are still about Rupert and the parts that are about her. And she's getting healthy in those places, right? So she's disengaging, but he can't.
Yeah.
His new partner, his new pregnancy, his new everything is all targeted to affect her.
Yeah.
And so it really is, it's a really interesting portrayal of someone who feels connected through control and who can't give it up even after a divorce.
Which I see so often.
Yes.
So often. And it's not just men who do it.
It is not just men who do it.
I see women, and it tends to look differently.
Absolutely.
The way they try to control, but it's still
it's harder to spot with women. Yeah. It's more covert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it tends to be more accusations of, things and trying to like, manipulate the co-parenting stuff a lot of times. But it's still there, very much engaged with it. So Rose, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was just thinking, when I see the after effects of, the marriage and their relationship evolving to this toxic point, I'm just curious, like, what is that imprint of their, what's the shadow look like of what they used to have? How did their marriage get to that point where control was okay and it was understood that it was tolerable? Like at some point, one or both of them agreed silently to this contract of, we will be in a controlling relationship. And I'm just curious, what were those events and how did it get to be so toxic?
My guess is he's always been. Yes. I think when I've seen, like, with the women, the clients that I have who are in these types of divorce situations, is they're usually pretty charming in the beginning.
Yes.
They're dynamic, vibrant people, and they're like, the partner's drawn in by that.
Yep.
Like, this person's so confident and they're so dynamic and everyone loves them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they do things to create that persona, right? Like the check at the gala.
Oh, right.
Oh,
yeah.
my
right.
gosh.
So if you are just an unsuspecting guest at that gala who doesn't understand all the dynamics that we're seeing as the viewers, as the audience, you have a very different opinion of Rupert, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to be in close proximity to Rupert to see what's really going on. And I think by the time women see, or victims, whether it's men or women, see what's really going on, it's a very complicated mess to untangle.
Yeah.
And we don't get the sense with Rupert that there's maybe physical violence.
Yeah.
And in a lot of situations there is. And so then it's also not safe to untangle. It's just it's not just complicated, it's unsafe to untangle by the time the whole facade falls.
Right. Well, not even physically unsafe. Sometimes it's they'll threaten, I'll ruin you. You'll be homeless. Or if they have kids together, like you'll never see your kids again. Like, they find ways to be,
and
stay and do that course.
Sometimes the socioeconomic status creates more control or perceived control or perceived power.
Absolutely.
When that is just farthest from the truth,
Yes.
It's like, I teach my clients a lot of times, to be kind to everyone. But if, like a janitor or a doctor or even a therapist were to be crossing a boundary with you that was, emotionally abusive, that you can get up and walk away. It doesn't matter their status or their socioeconomic status. You have the same power as anyone.
Maybe. I mean, theoretically, but I do think money can really speak volumes with divorce in particular. Like, money gets used as a weapon in divorce all the time.
Yeah.
There truly are people who do not have the same level of power in their relationship as the other person has. And that disempowerment creates this kind of trapped reality. And I think that's so I think both are true, right? That there are people who feel trapped and aren't trapped, right? And so then it's that empowering them to see the reality, because the person may have convinced them of an alternative reality that isn't real. So how do we help them outside of that, right? Then there are people who really are trapped, and how do we? That's about systems and institutions, and how we systemically fix that problem.
Differentiation.
Yeah.
So my last question then, when it wraps up, post-divorce dating. I just want a quick touch on this, because I love some of like that when Rebecca's talking about having to be vulnerable again.
Yes.
And when I love, like, when Roy tells her, like, find someone, who, like, I can't remember how he puts it, but it was like,
he's fine.
Yeah, this guy's fine, but you deserve, like, you should have more than fine. And so that's when that starts to get her thought process, like, I have to believe that I deserve more than fine. I have to be vulnerable, though. I have to put myself out there. And oh my God, when she said that, like, I'm sure I cried every time I watched that scene, because dating post-divorce, I mean, dating is a vulnerable exercise.
Yes,
it can really suck. But man, when you've been through a horrible divorce, and then you're trying to put yourself out there again, like, every part of your body is, like, you want that connection and you want to feel loved and seen and appreciated again, but at the same time, it's so terrifying.
It is.
Because, like, you've been hurt so deeply.
Yes.
And so I would love your thoughts on, if you were to give advice to people who are trying to date after divorce, how do we talk about this? Because I think a lot of times, I think our culture still judges divorce so much that we don't give a lot of support to people trying to date after divorce. I think there's a lot of stuff of, like, well, you screwed up the first one, so you're probably going to screw up the next one.
Yeah,
and
statistically, they all fail the second time anyway.
So I don't even know why you're bothering. You shouldn't have gone divorced in the first place. Can't help you.
Right.
But it's not realistic. And people do go on to date. Almost all people get divorced go on to date. And so what are your thoughts or little pearls of wisdom you'd like to share about dating post-divorce?
I would refer them to a therapist.
Well, I mean, I do. I think
it's complicated because sometimes with the divorce comes children. And how old are the children? There's so many different variables of what kind of partner are they looking for, and what kind of needs are they looking to be met? Because there's people that get divorced without children, and so I just think there's a lot of variables, and I don't really know if I have the best answer. I just know that walking to find solutions instead of running is really important, and making sure you're taking care of your health and your own mental health before trying to have those needs be fixed by a romantic relationship.
Oh, I think
is really, like, vital.
Yeah,
I think it is. I mean, I think, joking, refer to a therapist, but, like, so Rebecca, the first relationship she gets into, it's not just that it's fine. It's with another incredibly like narcissistic, self-focused man, right? Who can do nothing but talk about himself and has like no understanding of what's going on in the social context around him. And so I think that's this beautiful picture of like, we just repeat the patterns we haven't solved. Right? And so refer to therapy, right? I think she's got some work to do to figure out what about me is making me vulnerable to these types of men, right? Now, is she responsible for all of their awful behavior? No, absolutely not. And how does she get into a different kind of relationship? That's her work. And we haven't seen her really do much of that work yet.
That's true.
And so, and that, I mean, we don't have time to talk about it, but there's this fascinating connection then with Sam, who's a very different kind of person. Right? And so anyway, I think there's some interesting pieces there that maybe you can explore in a different episode, but
I wish we had time to get into the Sam thing.
Yeah, she needs to get her to do her own work, right?
She does.
Yeah.
I call that the hook. Like, what's the hook?
Yeah.
From Rupert and from this other guy, like what hooks you in about these men? And if you don't understand what that hook is, then you're going to be susceptible to getting hooked in again.
Right.
Because you have to understand, what is it about me? It's not about blaming you for their behavior, but it's like something drew you to that kind of person. Like Sassy said, like you walked every step. Why? And understanding, and rather than just blaming the other person, well, we got divorced because he was a narcissistic asshole.
Which is true.
Is true.
And
you got married for a very different reason.
Yes, exactly. And I love how it portrays that she had to have her own little diamond dog moments with Sassy talking about her climbing the stairs, and with Roy saying, he's fine, but that's not good enough. Right? She had to have those moments of somebody. And one of the things that I ask myself a lot when I watch the show is like, who are those people for me? And am I those people for someone? Like, because I think this show just shows us the power of telling the truth to each other.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes.
And so she needs that, and she has that. So it's interesting to see where it develops.
You need that reality check. You need those people outside your relationship who care enough about you to say, that's messed up.
Right. Right. And then you got to be able to hear that from them. Yeah, and that's all hard.
That's all hard.
Yeah.
So many things. I end each of these episodes thinking, I wish we had like another hour because there's so much to talk about. But thank you guys both so much for coming and talking to me. I love learning from both of you, I hope I can have you on the show again. Yeah, talking about a different show. Oh, sorry, quick minute. What show are you watching right now?
What show?
That you get excited about from the point of view of a therapist?
Oh, what is the name of it? Oh, goodness. It's about
Shrinking.
Well, Shrinking.
I love that one.
We'll be talking about that one next.
Yeah.
I cannot remember the name of it. It's a show about an attorney and her kid is kind of messed up. He's a detective. Like, he's a detective that lost his license, and so she hires him to work for her firm.
Oh, that sounds
good. I don't know about that one.
I'll have to get you the name of it. Yeah, there's only one season out, and I just watched the first season, and there's so many interesting psychological dynamics in it. So many. But I'll have to get you the name of it, because now I remember the story, because that's what but not the name.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys both so much, and I can't wait to have you on again.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
This episode of When Therapists Watch TV was produced by Ellie Mental Health. Miranda Barker is the managing producer. Jesse Stenbrotten is the technical director. Our production team also includes Julia Galloway, Lucas Mooney, and Tu Pham. A special thanks to Lucas Fellini, Nick Seeger, and Mel Springer. I'm Dr. Terry Bly. Thanks for listening.